very much, Uri. It's good to have a chance to speak on this topic at such an important time in the industry. I've been analysing the crisis week by week, and you'll probably have seen some of my analysis as part of OAG's tracking and commentary. So I've been asked to share 3 pieces of advice for airlines to survive and rethink their future. It's a difficult time, no doubt, and there are no easy answers, but I've come up with three things, and I suppose they're quite sort of big picture elements. So the first comes from my long history in the industry, and it's know what your asset is. And by this, I mean you need to know where the value lies in your business, as that's the starting point for moving forward. I started my career in aviation at Pan Am back in 1988. Remember then? Unfortunately for me, this was just 3 months before Lockerbie, which was the ultimate undoing for the airline. But they'd been a major name in aviation until then. They flew from 1927 until 1991. They were pioneers. They were credited with the widespread use of jet aircraft, jumbo jets, and computerized reservation systems. They were the launch customer for the 747. Yet back in the early 1980s, the airline wasn't making any money and sold off many assets to keep going. One of those was the Pan Am building, which became the MetLife building for the next decade. Around the time that Pan Am finally went under, the building was sold by MetLife for $1.8 billion. As an ex-employee, I've wondered for years if they should have kept the building and sold the airline, but that would have been unthinkable then. For those of us who love this industry, it's all about the business of flying, but sometimes we need to put our business heads on and think the unthinkable. Are the assets of the business really associated with flying? This example may be really extreme, but in these unprecedented times, being realistic about what your assets are may never have been as important. Let me give you another more recent example. Frequent flyer programs. For some airlines, these generate large amounts of money. Qantas is one airline which has a separate business entity for its loyalty program. And in 2019, in their annual report, the loyalty business earned about the same amount as the Jetstar group for Qantas. But the operating margin was really different, 22.6% for Qantas loyalty and 9.3% for Jetstar group. Now, maybe the loyalty program can't operate without the airline, but that may change. It may only be a matter of time before frequent flyer programs are more closely associated with banks, credit cards, insurance programs, and so on. In this digital age, data can be quite an asset too. Airlines have plenty of data about their passengers and leverage that to sell other products. So as I said at the start, know what your assets are. What's the part of your business that's capable of generating revenue and profit into the future? Should they be the parts of the business that are kept rather than those that are sold to raise cash and protect what's been the business of the past? I'm not saying that airlines and flying is part of the past, but it's very easy in this industry to have a bit of a blind spot. Many of us who really love airlines and the whole business of flying find it easy to have rose-tinted glasses about the industry, especially so when we've invested a whole career in this sector. But as I learned, even Pan Am failed. My next thought is about being clear where competitive advantage lies. And we've just heard from Air Baltic, who are really articulate, very clear about the competitive advantage they have in operating the A220. And in some ways, this is the most basic sort of question I'm going to look at. Every MBA student spends time considering competitive advantage. In what ways can your business offer customers better value? How can you generate more sales or superior margins compared to market rivals? The reason it's now important is that as the market changes around us, what was your competitive advantage not long ago may just be less of one now. Pre-COVID, you may have been very clear where your competitive advantage lay, but it may be that this is just less relevant to customers now, but some other aspect of your business is better placed to offer that competitive advantage. Qatar Airways is a good example, I think, of this. At the start of the pandemic, other airlines suspended operations, but Qatar, along with the airport, decided to facilitate transit traffic throughout the pandemic. Their global network wasn't much of a competitive advantage in getting people on holiday or traveling for business, but it could be used to get people home who are stranded in other parts of the world. Qatar became a lifeline for many travellers, creating huge goodwill in the process. They were also in tune with the zeitgeist early on and offered the chance for healthcare workers to win one of 100,000 free tickets for a return journey with a partner. They were reaching out to new audiences, being seen to care for those putting their lives at risk, trying to raise confidence in flying, and again, drawing attention to their reach. They repositioned their competitive advantage, which was connectivity and global reach, to a new purpose. For several decades now, we've seen low-cost carriers carve out competitive advantage through offering low fares supported by their low-cost business model. But these rely on being able to fill aircraft. We've seen how low-cost carriers have edged load factors higher and higher over the years. But can this still be a competitive advantage in these times when passengers are reluctant to sit on packed planes next to a stranger? Yes, maybe, if it means the airline has sufficient cash to weather this storm and can use their expertise in stimulating markets to tempt travellers back again. The day before yesterday, I had an email from Ryanair drop in my inbox with details of their 24-hour flash sale, trying to persuade me to fly with 100,000 seats available across their network for just £9.99 each. We're already seeing in China a couple of low-cost airlines make a grab for market share, and we may well be seeing the same with Ryanair, but with traveller confidence still low, this is likely to take some time. But what if you're a legacy carrier where your competitive advantage traditionally has been based more around the global network and high service levels? Customer experience and a sense of being valued has all been part of their competitive advantage until now. But does that count for anything at the moment? We know that some of those valued customers are feeling seriously annoyed by the use of vouchers for travel rather than refunds, and a fair bit of goodwill may have been lost. What if those key customers don't want excellent service now, but want reassurance that it's safe to fly, or want to know that they have space around them when on an aircraft, or just want certainty that a booking they make will not result in a flight being cancelled? Some airlines are going to have to rethink where their competitive advantage lies. Can their large aircraft be the safe place to sit because of the space for passengers? Is the record of good schedule management and limited use of cancellations the key message that potential customers want to hear? Or is it the seamless way the airline and airport are working together to make travel safe that'll be where the competitive advantage lies? Competitive advantage is partly about the customer having a reason to choose your product over another. When you know where your competitive advantage lies, you need to communicate that with your customers, which takes us to my third point. Know who you are targeting and know your customer base really well. That's old news, isn't it? Data helps. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently and wrote a lengthy blog about a few weeks ago, which you can find on the MIDAS Aviation website if you want to read it in full. I tried to take a step back from my day-to-day analysis of the industry and consider some of the long-term changes we may be facing. And it came about after a chance conversation with a friend whose husband is what we typically refer to as a road warrior, travelling long haul many times each year. That was until March. Now he's been working from home for 6 months and doesn't think he'll ever go back to the level of travelling he was doing. I was intrigued. Anyway, he said that maybe he'll do 20% or 40% of the travel he did, but not much more than that. So I went out and asked a handful of other friends who were all frequent flyers for work, and they all said pretty much the same thing. I was quite shocked, really. They'll still fly on business to see customers and to sign deals, but none of them think they'll be flying for internal company meetings. They may reduce air travel by 80% or 60%. These are the premium customers, and we need to think about this really carefully. We might be seeing a really fundamental change in corporate travel taking place. Science shows that it takes 2 to 3 months for new behaviours to become automatic, to become a habit. Well, we're 6 months into this habit-changing experience. At the moment, we know that many major companies have already said that staff will not be going back to work in offices for some time yet, often not until 2021 at the earliest. Many employees may well be home-based for at least a year, and that's a long time to become accustomed to a different way of working, a different way of interacting, and a different work-life balance. We need to be honest about what the impact will be on airline business models if the corporate travel sector doesn't come back, or doesn't come back in the volumes we're used to. Deirdre, one of my business partners at MIDAS Aviation, likens this to the Napster moment, which Skift wrote about 2 or 3 weeks ago in relation to the event industry. In the late 1990s, Napster changed the way we listen to music, changing it from CD purchases to streaming and digital downloads. It not only changed the way we bought music, but how we listened to it, how artists got discovered, musicians made a living, and how radio stations worked. No one in the music industry liked this change. They didn't want the status quo to change, but the companies that emerged from that structural change are some of the market leaders today. We've seen similar revolutions in digital TV, use of taxi companies, takeout food, and retail shopping is currently being hugely challenged by the likes of Amazon. Is it aviation's turn? It's a somber question, I know. For years, we've assumed there's no alternative to the physical networking that can take place at conferences and meetings. We've had digital platforms available, but lockdown has suddenly made them viable alternatives. Here we are attending a digital conference. It's different to what we're used to doing, but it works. Of course, it's not the same, but some things can work really well. I was at a virtual conference last month and loved the fact that I could move between seminar rooms and the main hall to see if there was something more interesting going on without having to get up out of my seat or make my way past a bunch of delegates clutching their papers and phones to their knees in the dark, all by clicking a button. And I love being able to listen in on a discussion taking place on an exhibitor stall without feeling that I was eavesdropping. I was learning from the experts. But there are more customer types than just business or leisure. If you've not really got to grips with the differences between millennials, Generation Y and Gen Z, then now may be a good time. Wizz Air certainly believes that its appeal to millennials will pay off, as these younger travellers may be the most willing to fly sooner. Apparently the average age of a Wizz passenger is 36, whereas the 3/4 of Lufthansa passengers are over 40. It's not a simple matter to change the demographic of your target customers. Millennials want to be communicated with in very different ways to older travellers. We're talking mobile apps here rather than emails. In the physical world, you need to be socially distanced, but my advice is that in the digital world, you need to keep as close to your customers as you can, understanding who they are, what they want, what their concerns are, and what will get them flying again. Obviously, widespread and changing travel restrictions, as we've been hearing, are making things really difficult. But even before these lift, we need to be reassuring travellers that flying is safe. So there you have it. Know what your assets are, understand your competitive advantage in these times, and get super close to your customer. This isn't the time to sit back and wait for customers and the market to return to normal. Normal may have changed forever, and your airline may need to change too. So feel free to use the chat area to have a conversation about what I've been saying, or email me at becca@midasaviation.com, or come and find me on LinkedIn. Over to you again, Uri.
Thank you very much, Becca. Thank you for very interesting insights. We already have two interesting questions in the Q&A section. So let's start with Laszlo. So he asks, do you agree that without state aid support, both legal and illegal, all airlines and airports would go bust?
I'm just looking to see where that question is actually. Yes, well, I think some airlines will go bust. It's hard to imagine at the industry being able to survive for as long as it may take for air traffic to get back to where it was. For all those airlines to still be in place in a year's time, I find that quite hard to imagine. At the moment, we're looking at the end of the year maybe still being 50% down in capacity, and load factors are well below that. So, you know, we have a fraction of the number of people flying at the moment that were flying a year ago, and that's not really going to improve before the end of the year. If offices don't go back to, or workers don't go back to their offices till maybe April, May is the sort of timescale I'm often hearing, and people aren't looking to fly for business. We know we're going into the winter months now with airlines very short of cash. So yes, governments can step in and help. But if governments start to wonder if it's going to be 3-4 years until the airlines recover, as one of your earlier speakers said, you know, fixing the aviation industry's problems is not at the top of their priority list. So it's going to be a really tough time. I think we expect to see more airlines failing. How much more money we see from governments coming forward, in some ways, is anyone's guess.
Yeah, and your colleague John Grant, he always says that there is just massive, or there was massive overcapacity in many markets, including Europe, and it's just probably a natural way how things work, that not airline can survive this. So
yes, and we've seen, you know, certainly in other parts of the world, in North America, we've seen a lot of consolidation over a number of years. So we have, you know, a handful of large airlines. We haven't seen that same sort of consolidation in Europe. I'm not quite sure how that works with so many individual countries in Europe, but yeah, the business, my business head says that we should be looking at some level of consolidation.
Of course, and yes, we have the second question from Rick on hub and spoke model. So what are your thoughts on this model being sustained post-COVID? Will there be greater demand for non-stop direct routes as a demand for air travel returns, or do you think governments will need to address their air service agreements to facilitate demand for non-stop operations? So very complex questions, so maybe let's take it step by step.
Yeah,
Well, model.
I think what we've been saying for a while at MIDAS is that we expect people to want to fly non-stop. I think there's a real, the safety, the security concerns around connecting through airports are real, that if you make a connecting journey, you know you're going to be mixing with passengers from a range of different countries for an indeterminate amount of time, perhaps, that actually, if safety is your main concern as a passenger, you're going to want to fly non-stop. But that's not to say, as I explained earlier with the example of Qatar, there aren't ways to make connectivity work, to make hub systems work. Whether that advantage stays with Qatar for a long time, I don't know. You know, one of the things we're going to see is the long haul travel is going to take much longer to come back. So we'll see people flying locally, regionally. Those are the markets that are going to come back, and that's where there's more non-stops available. So the airports that are focused on long haul connectivity, I think that's going to take some time to come back. So yeah, hub and spoke, not sure that that's going to be where the focus is for some time.
And what about the last part of the question? So do you think governments will need to address their air service agreements to facilitate demand for non-stop operations?
Maybe, but we're not going to see demand at more than it has been in the past for some time. So I suspect that mostly the air service agreements are working as they need to at the moment. I'm not sure, you know, usually you go and renegotiate air service agreements when you've got a surplus of demand, or, you know, you've got more and more people wanting to fly, and the air service agreements that exist are insufficient for the capacity. That's not the situation we're in at the moment.